Hey guys, it's Gary, back again. I've been pasting a lot of stuff up here lately. I've been thinking about doing this one video for a while. It's kind of late in the evening now, I guess, for me to start doing another video, but it's not an epic. It shouldn't be anyway. Decided maybe this would be a shorter one because I know I just did a 72.5 minutes epic a couple days ago. And this one is one that I don't know if it's a unique oddity to me, which is why I'm bringing it up, or whether, well, if anybody suffers from this malady, as I do, it would certainly be other members of the vinyl community, or music fanatics in general, I should say. Certainly not all of you, maybe none of you. But I would do it anyway. One of my, excuse my back here for a minute. One of my old videos, and this is kind of a continuation on the theme, was the ECM Works series, and that is was a series of compilations put out by ECM Records, done in the late 80s, actually, right at the advent of CD technology. They did their first ever compilations of artists' work. And I went out and got just about all of them on the original Works series. And on just about all of them, if not all of them, I had all the material anyway. Why? Well, there's a couple reasons. In some artists' case, like an Eberhard Weber or a Ralph Towner or somebody like that, I'm a fanatic and I have to have everything that they've put out. Also, when you get to somebody that I like very much, like an Eberhard Weber or whatever, listen to all his albums multiple times, it's kind of interesting to hear things out of context. You know, when you listen to the full albums as I do, you know what this song follows, this song, this other track is on the album. You know exactly what you're going to hear even before you play the album. So sometimes with compilations, even if they're not the particular material I would choose for a compilation, it's interesting because you hear one track from one album and then you don't know what to expect next. So it's kind of, it's almost like putting an iPod on shuffle, I guess, kind of thing. However, one of the things, and I know this for a fact, that got me hooked on the ECM Works series, I pulled out a few here, but they're all in the old video, are the covers. They used very creative cover artwork that just draws me in totally. And what they did, you can't really see the picture there that well, but you will. What they did is for nearly all of the series, there was a couple later ones where they used different covers, they used variations on the same picture, photo, whatever you want to call it, highlighting it during different hours of the day type of thing. See, this is all the same picture that they're using there. I guess that would be a very late at night photo. Here's maybe the sun coming up photo. It's all the same photo though, and there's many. I'm not showing them all. You know, they did lots of variations, and a couple of these are so fantastic. More along the lines of the like the Pat Metheny ones, and well, I like the Ungarbrick one. The Ungarbrick is nice. It's a little foggy version of the picture. The real late at night one, the Keith Jarrett, is very nice. Couple of those I've even wanted to get the vinyl just for the 12x12 picture. I wouldn't even open it. And I know the thing that really spurred me on. I've been thinking about doing this for months. The thing that spurred me on to make the video is Jeff Vinylspin has been doing a fantastic jazz series showing his jazz albums, and he just happened to pull out his copy of Pat Metheny's Works album. First time I've ever seen the 12x12 artwork. And originally the albums were not released in this country. I mean, you can get them online now. I know they put them, oddly enough, they put the vinyl back in print again, but they were not originally available on vinyl, and so I had no idea for many years that they even came out on vinyl. And initially here in the U.S. they were sold as being kind of things to introduce the compact disc to the ECM listeners because at that time they hadn't barely touched their back catalog, putting that out on CD. And I know, and this is pretty much what this video is about. I mean, I did the ECM videos. It's almost kind of number 2 in the series. I know that I'm getting suckered in by the artwork. I've done videos on this before. How do I know I'm getting suckered in by the artwork? Because in recent years, ECM did its second round of artist compilations, the Rerum Series. And I have been less fanatical about collecting those. Why? You know, because the artwork sucks, basically. It's nothing. It's you know, very unlike ECM. Very dull, cardboardy things, you know, no pictures. This is just a few of them. I only have a couple more of these. And in fact, there's more material. These, the Rerum series, actually are longer CDs. The first batch of CDs were only 40-something to 50 minutes long because they also were put on vinyl. And that was the restrictions on vinyl. These are more pushing toward the 80-minute, you know, anywhere from 70 to 80-minute. And they're interesting because they do come many years later after the Works series. And so there's more material from these artists to choose from, but they also, in this case, let the artist choose their own material, what they wanted included. So the liner notes written by the artist are actually very interesting in these. And I have more than I'm showing here. But I haven't been so fanatical about collecting those, and I have to wonder if it's possibly because I'm not as turned on by the artwork. I don't know. I think that may be it. Because I showed these once before. I'm not sure. I think it was in a video. I bought the album because I liked the cover art. There's a series called Night Music, put out by the Naxos label, which was a budget label, but the prices have gone creeping up, so not everything they put out is budget stuff. Certainly, probably a little bit more reasonable than your standard CD prices, but they used to be, you know, like $7, you know, for a brand new release. They're not that price anymore. They came out with this Night Music series. These have OBs on them, but and I got so hooked on these covers. These are classical music compilations. And as far as classical music compilations go, they're good. They're all in the 70 or so minute range. So they give you the value for your dollar. But I know I bought them for the cover. And in fact, there's 35 volumes, and I'm never going to collect all 35, even when I do start working again. I think that would just be crazy. Because I can't say that these collections are any better than any other classical collection. I know there's a lot of budget classical collections out there which are questionable because they look attractive. They're very low in price, but then you look at the running time is like 45 minutes or so. You know, the one thing that a collection like this has is at least they do get close to the capacity of the CDs. I bought 5. I have 5, but there's 35 right now that exist. But I know I got them before the covers. Here's number 7. That's a fantastic cover. And yes, I have listened to all of these. But like I said, you know, could I pick them out from one compilation from any other compilation? Not really. But these are just, you know, kind of takes me back to the days, being an oldie, of the 12-inch vinyl album covers, when you had nothing to do. It was either put on the TV or the radio. There was no internet. So, you know, nothing on TV and radio, and VCRs didn't exist, and downloads and all this stuff didn't exist. Streaming didn't exist. What did we do? We listened to records, and we pretty much stared at the covers and the back art, if any, and whatever information's on the back. But I know I bought these because I like the cover. And that's what this video is all about. Here's the 5th and last one that I have, Night Music 10. Another nice cover. The music's fine. It's excellent quality recordings. If you ever see any of those selections, and you don't really know anything about classical music, and you want to get into it a little bit, I highly recommend them. But now, the meat of the matter here is, there's this series that I fell in love with And, I didn't fall in love with it at the time they came out. It started about 1987. These are all pretty much out of print now, but, the copies are still around there. And I've even been scurrying lately because, stupid me, I didn't buy them when they were new in the store for $8.99 at the beginning of the CD era. It was about 1987 when Verve Records started putting out some of their stuff on, or their jazz stuff anyway, on a set of compact discs compilations called Compact Jazz. Compact discs were new, and there's a couple things they had going on with this series. One was that, like I said, this started pretty much at the beginning of the CD era, and 1987 it seems like the series started. And with the compact disc being new, there's a couple things going on. They probably didn't know for sure whether or not the format was going to stick. And they had this enormous back catalog that they probably couldn't get released on CD, meaning all of the artists that they had, especially in the past, had all these albums out. A lot of jazz artists are incredibly prolific. And they're busy pretty much getting their new releases out on, at that time, still album and still cassette and also on compact discs. But, also we've got this huge back catalog. The initial factories that were pressing up CDs were busy all the time. And it's like, how do we get this back catalog stuff out? And again, they're not even sure whether or not this, was going to be a viable, profitable media. How long was CDs going to stick around? Were people really going to pick up on it, et cetera, et cetera. So what a lot of record labels did, but I'm kind of focusing here on this compact jazz series. So what they did is, whatever material they had, and a lot of these are really, really strange and not very good, certainly not good overviews of the artists that they represent. But they came out like any other, and at that time, a lot of the material, if not most of the material on these, being older material, had not been released on compact disc yet. The original albums the material was drawn from was not released yet. So as a way to kind of sample tracks that you knew maybe by an artist on the CD medium, kind of have a best of as well. But I didn't initially jump at them, and I'm sorry I didn't now, because I've really, just in the last couple of years, I've fallen in love with this collection, this ridiculous collection for totally ridiculous reasons. And I'm going to show you, maybe it's not so evident, maybe so much from the Buddy Rich thing. The one thing that I like about literally all of these, kind of like the Work series on ECM, is there was somebody who designed the original covers, and they did this the logo's almost always the same, the Compact Jazz logo. The artist's name is there, and they have this very cool design that carries through on just about all of the CDs, including many that I don't have. And that is a mixture of these old-timey black and white photographs, and every once in a while you get a little pinch of color in there. And it really makes, to me, it makes the cover jump out in a way, and certainly the jazz, it being in red, does as well. And I just like that combo. It's interesting because if you're aware of the way record companies market their stuff, this was not a modern-looking, hip design in the late 80s when these series came out. I'll show you another one. You could kind of follow the theme. There's Wes Montgomery's. And they all have little interesting, like in this one it looks like there's, what do you call it? Wine uncorkers. That's like there. There's one of those wine decorker things there. Black and white photos, and they're showing things, in a lot of cases, things from the era that the music was recorded in. That's typically not the way that record companies sell new product, or repackage old product to make it look like it's something new. And this is a practice that goes way back, and I'll just show you. I just grabbed a couple really kind of weak examples. This even goes back to the LP era, but it's something that still holds on today. Back in the mid to late 70s, Miles Davis had gone into retirement for about 5 or 6 years. But regardless of that, Columbia, that he recorded with for many years, had a lot of material in the can that hadn't been issued. So they were releasing Miles albums throughout his whole. There was no shortage of Miles albums. You would never even know he retired, because Columbia kept on putting out all this material. And of course, when they were putting out in pretty much the late 70s until he came out of retirement about 80 or 81, the covers looked to be from that era, from that late 70s era, even if the material itself may have been from late 60s or so. Well, to jump on the bandwagon, kind of, Prestige Records, who was Miles Davis's the first main label that he recorded for, at least that recorded a large body of work for in his popular years, when he had his original acoustic quintet band, with John Coltrane on sax and Philly Joe Jones on drums and Paul Chambers on bass. That whole band. And Red Garland on piano, a sadly overlooked piano player. That material went back to the 50s. And yet it didn't stop them, Prestige, even though they didn't have any unreleased material really, it didn't prevent them from repackaging the 50s material from this quintet, and even in some cases from earlier, and marketing it and using modern day pictures. That's a picture of Miles Davis from the from the 70s, from pretty much the period that this music was released. Just before he went into retirement. The very hip. He had funky glasses that would out Elton John kind of thing, and dressing very hip. And if you just saw this in the racks amongst all the Miles Davis stuff, you would probably think it was, it's a new Miles Davis album. Same thing with this picture of him in the boxing ring, obviously from the early 70s, and yet all this material goes back to his early 50s, even before the quintet. So my point being that usually when record labels market albums and repackage albums, they like to do it so that it looks like it's something new. And the thing that just has enamored me to this compact jazz, this Verve Collections, are the fact that they didn't try to do that. They're doing these very interesting things that purposely seem to reflect the time period that the music was recorded in. Most of the releases that I have by them, and most of the releases in general, some of them go back to the 40s, most of the releases have material from the early to late 60s, 1960s. Here's one I just picked up, Art Blakey. Okay, there's a little bit more color in this one. But I love that, this. If you actually look at the detail on the cards and little knickknacks that they kind of include on there, a little bit hard to see. You can tell it's definitely from another era, and they've got that black and white and color thing going on there. Usually, it's the photos of the artists themselves that are in black and white. It's a very interesting cover design, and I have to tell you, it's totally got me hooked on buying these. These were about $8.99 when they came out new in the store. Now I'm buying, they're out of print. I can't get new copies of most of these. And I'm buying used copies, and I'm spending more than $9 for used copies. Jimmy Smith, another example, like cigarette lighters and all that. It's got a very, early 60s, late 50s vibe to it. And I really dig that. Now, most of these came out starting in '87, and they went for a few years. And they also had a couple variations where I just showed you the Jimmy Smith, which is just called Compact Jazz, as most of them are. But then they decided to do a second volume of Jimmy Smith Plays the Blues, which is also another Compact Jazz compilation. And it's all, from the same period. They did this with some of the more popular artists, I noticed. They would have one just called Compact Jazz, and then they would do a second volume. They did it for Wes Montgomery, Jimmy Smith, Charlie Parker. They did a regular Compact Jazz. They did Charlie Parker Plays the Blues. If you know anything about Jimmy Smith, this is totally ridiculous because pretty much Jimmy doesn't play anything but the blues. So the first one, the original Compact Jazz, this is all blues anyway. I don't even know if there's anything on here that you could consider not blues, even a single track. This is obviously all blues. So in the case of Jimmy Smith, it's absolutely silly. In the case of other people, maybe a bit different, and I can't find one of them I'm looking for. Did I already show Wes Montgomery? Yeah. So here's Wes Montgomery's, which I think I showed. Oh yeah, with the bottle of the wine decorker thing. What the hell do you call those things? Here's Wes Montgomery Plays the Blues, and this cover I particularly like. This is actually the very first one I bought. I don't know why I have all the material. This is actually the very first one I bought. I can remember the store I bought it in. This was an $8.99. Oh look, I even stuck the sticker on. I took the sticker off the cellophane and put it in. $8.98. $8.98. I don't even know why I bought it, but I'm such a Wes Montgomery fanatic. This cover I particularly like because, even though it came out in the 80s, there's no pretense that this is a new hip album. Just in case you didn't know, Wes Montgomery wasn't alive in the 80s, and a lot of people wouldn't know. And they've got those color photos of the old cars. I am so enamored with this collection, that I'm putting on these discs and I'm loading them in my computer like I always do, listening to them from there, and I'm actually looking at the covers like I used to look at album covers. Another recent one that I got, I think I found this one new. I still found a sealed copy, Tjader. With the same kind of design. There's a lot of mostly black and white here, with the old cameras. I just love that idea because nobody sells or repackages old things and acknowledging the fact that they're old. It seems like they want you to think everything was made yesterday or today. Toots Thielemans, who I have a bunch of vinyl of, but I think this is my first CD of his, actually. Toots on harmonica. Toots plays guitar really nicely, too, by the way, in case you didn't know. Antonio Carlos Jobim, another nice design, who's got another artist. There's no shortage of compilations by these guys. And this isn't a particularly good one. As a matter of fact, none of these compilations are, with very rare exception, are actually highly recommendable for a couple reasons that I'll list. In this particular case, I think most, I could be wrong. I think most people that listen nowadays to Antonio Carlos Jobim probably want to hear more of the instrumental stuff and the vocal stuff. This is mostly vocal stuff. Maybe about a third of this is instrumental, which is pretty much what I want to hear when I hear Jobim now. It's not entirely bad, and because I don't go after seeking the albums that have a heavy vocal component to them of his material. It's nice to have in the collection because it's sampling albums of his that I probably wouldn't get. They're too heavily on the vocal side. And this is an odd one. This is an interesting one because it's Miles has got no shortage of material to choose from, but in most cases he didn't record for Verve or whoever the hell Verve owned or bought at the time, so they only have access, and that's what most of the fault, if any, with these CDs is they only have a limited amount of material to draw from. The Miles thing doesn't draw from any of his Prestige material and none of his Columbia material, which leaves almost nothing left. What it does is it actually samples some of the work that he did with Charlie Parker before he started his career. And Michel Legrand, who wrote a piece for kind of like a large-scale jazz orchestra and had a whole bunch of named people playing on that particular album. I want to say it's from the late 50s. And had Miles play on this Michel Legrand album. There's samples of that here, which are very interesting to hear if you don't have that album. So it's got the 1951 Charlie Parker thing, the Michel Legrand thing, which I can't find. I'm pretty sure. I want to say that's somewhere around the 59 or so. The Michel Legrand album. That Michel Legrand album, by the way, is in print. Doesn't have Miles on the whole thing. Actually, this one I would recommend for an oddball sampling of material. If you're going to get into Miles, but you're not going to go all the way back to his Charlie Parker Association, this is good because this material pretty much doesn't show up on his other compilations on Columbia, where he spent most of his career, or Prestige, where he did his early career on. Michel Legrand's stuff is recorded June 25th, 1958. The Charlie Parker stuff is January 17th, 1951. The other thing, and most of the album here, which is actually really good music, but I'd recommend buying the full album, is the soundtrack that Miles did and recorded in December of 1957 for La Ascension Power. I can't. You know that French movie that he did the soundtrack for in France? If I recall, it's the Americanized title is Elevator to the Gallows, I believe was the American title of the movie. And that is probably about half of the material on that. It's a really haunting, really pretty, very low-key acoustic band. It was recorded in Paris in 57. That entire album is worth hearing. If you're not going to pick it up, though, this is the only place we're going to hear excerpts of it, is on the Compact Jazz Collection, because it was recorded for some other label. Bunch of French musicians involved with Miles. Miles didn't bring his band over to Paris, apparently. Barney Willen on tenor sax. Rene Erdiger. I've looked at this guy's name for decades because he's actually fairly well known in French jazz, but I've never tried to pronounce his name. Rene Erdiger. Erdiger on piano. You probably know who I'm talking about, or you don't. Pierre McLaughlin on bass, and Kenny Clark on drums. Kenny Clark was an American jazz drummer, originally the drummer for the Modern Jazz Quartet. He had moved to Paris and stayed there for years. Because the working situation for jazz musicians was much better there. He was one of the early transplants that went and stayed for a hell of a long time. Philly Joe Jones even went for a while. So Miles got to play with Kenny Clark, who I'm sure he had played with earlier in America, on that Elevator to the Gallows, the French movie that I can't pronounce. I bet you Carm could pronounce it, though. So this one isn't bad for an oddball collection. Like I said, going back to that Charlie Parker stuff. Oops, let me see. Here's another one I picked up recently. I had to buy it used. Modern Jazz Quartet Plus. Now, the Modern Jazz Quartet, if you know anything about them, you know they recorded a lot of albums over a lot of years. When I talk about this, the Compact Jazz Series not being really a great overview of an artist's career, they've only selected material from 2 albums here. 2 albums recorded in 1957. They're both live albums. And the 2 albums were recorded something like 9 days apart. So, and they're both live albums. So you're really not getting... One was recorded October 27th, 1957. Where's the date for? And the other one was October 19th, 1957. So they really had apparently slim pickings, because if you look at the MJQ, the Modern Jazz Quartet's output, there's nothing wrong with the material on here, but then they pull a real boner because they include 2 tracks that don't even have the Modern Jazz Quartet on them. They include 2 tracks of Milt Jackson, the vibraphone player, for the Modern Jazz Quartet. 2 tracks that he did with Oscar Peterson, the great jazz pianist, and a different rhythm section. So there's no MJQ, it's just Milt Jackson from the MJQ on 2 of these tracks. So you've only got 8 selections from the MJQ, only taken from 2 albums. So, sometimes these are, like I said, nothing wrong with the material, but you might as well just pick up the separate albums. But because I'm a completist, this cover's a little different. This is a lot more colorful than the typical black and white thing. And the last one I have to show, which is another oddball in terms of the material included, and it's the only one that kind of goes out a little bit out of their usual context, is John McLaughlin, because they don't do a whole lot of fusion. They actually have, I think, like a Chuck Mangione thing. It's not really fusion. They do have a couple Chick Corea compact jazz collections that touch on a little bit of his fusion-y stuff. But yeah, I like that design, though. I like the rulers there, and that, to me, the color really pops because of the black and white. And that's why I bought this, because the material from here is just so scattershot, oddball. It's got some material from his, I think 1969-1970 Extrapolation album, which is a very early, very, very early recording. A good recording. It's got John Sermon on sax, but it's too oddball when contrasted with some of the other stuff in here. Yeah, it's got material from 1969's Extrapolation, which is a really good jazz album, but not very well recorded. So you don't want to hear that track in context, followed by a track following it that was recorded 10 or 15 years later that has a much better recorded sound. When you're listening to an album that doesn't have the best recorded sound, it's best to listen to that album in full. So if you're going to listen to Extrapolation, listen to Extrapolation. Kind of get used to the fact that rhythm section isn't that well recorded. But it's got material from 68 from the Extrapolation, and all from 69 from Extrapolation, and John played with Tony Williams' Lifetime, which some folks may be aware of, in 68, 69, and 70. So they recorded some of that material from Tony Williams' Lifetime. So that's a little bit of the more up-tempo, kind of easing toward fusion-y stuff. Several tracks from Extrapolation. And so it goes from material from 69 through 70 with 3 tracks from Tony Williams' Lifetime. 69 Extrapolation solo album by John McLaughlin, with John Sermon on sax, by the way. And then goes ahead to 1980, a big jump ahead, missing the 70s completely, which is fine. I don't have a problem with them not including Mahavishnu Orchestra, because that's kind of its own. It's John McLaughlin's band, but it's kind of its own entity, and John's recorded so many solo things that I can understand keeping that material separate, even if they had access to it, which they didn't, I'm sure. But it jumps ahead from the 1970 Tony Williams Lifetime track 10 years to 1980. John did a lot of recording, even a lot of stuff that wasn't Mahavishnu Orchestra in that period. From the Guitar Trio Live, which is Al Di Meola and Paco de Lucia, I think. And there one track from there, and then jumping ahead again, and this is where just the contrast is too much. A track from 89 and a track from 1991. That's a big leap. With the trio that John had with Trilok Gertu on percussion and a couple different bass players. The bass players changed. It was basically bass, Trilok on percussion, and John McLaughlin on guitar. And of course, those tracks from 89-91 are modern digital technology. There's a depth to the sound there. It's too much contrast, because you're going from it starts off with a track from 1989, a live trio thing with Trilok Gertu, that very live, very digital, very modern sound, to a 1969 track from Extrapolation, and it's a mess. It's it's too much adjusting for your ears to do, I think. But I'm in love with the series. Another weird thing I noticed, and I just found out recently with this series, is that nearly all of them are an hour's length, like 57, 58, 59 minutes. And I'm like, well, the capacity for CDs initially was 74 minutes. It's 80 now. But at this time, when they were coming out, it's 74 minutes. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out why they did. They had, even the few albums that they had access to, they're choosing one or two tracks from. They could have built it up and chosen more. It's only recently, when looking like around Discogs and places like that, I didn't realize these, they kind of couldn't, they made it so that they couldn't lose their money when making these. These I thought were initially only available on compact disc, but in the late 80s, cassettes were still popular. So what they did is they made them available on cassettes too. And the reason, in my thinking, that they pretty much kept these under 60 minutes is to make the production of the cassettes easier. Instead of worrying about this album is 74 minutes, this album is 60 minutes, this album is 65 minutes, they tried most of those, not all of them, but most of those are under 60 minutes, or like 57 to 59 minutes. And I'm thinking, you know what? All they had to do is just send in a few 100,000 60-minute cassettes, and we'll formulate it 30 minutes aside, and boom, it's easy. We don't have to worry about what album we're putting on there. It could be Antonio Carlos Jobim, Jimmy Smith, Wes Montgomery. Doesn't matter, because they all run about 59 minutes, 57 minutes or so. I don't know if that's being cynical. But considering that, they obviously had, and like the Jobim album pulls from, this one pulls from quite a few Jobim albums. They could have included additional tracks from those albums, even if they had no access to additional albums. All of these, they could have pulled more material from. Even the Modern Jazz Quartet, they only pulled from 2 of their albums, and then they started pulling from Milt Jackson and Oscar Peterson albums. They could have included more of those tracks. I don't know what they were thinking, and coming nowhere near 70 minutes for any of these. So, is that cynical thinking, to think that they just kept it easy? Hey, if we keep these all within the same running time, we don't have to worry about, using a different blank cassette for this artist gets this length, that artist gets that length. We just have the compact jazz series, and 90% of them run 60 minutes, and we could just make, forgive the flashing, my friggin' TV. We could just make up as, however many, 10,000 of these Wes Montgomery cassettes, and if they sell, we'll make up another batch and use 60-minute tapes and Jimmy Smith, whatever. I don't know, is that cynical or what, but I just can't explain otherwise why these were all kept down to, under 60 minutes. And Verve, let me start on Verve. Verve is like, Verve is the master of compilations when it comes to jazz, let me tell you. I don't know of, well, my reason for doing this video, let me say, is I don't know if any of you guys experience that same thing, where even though, there's a lot of shortcomings to that compact jazz series, I still am in love with the series because of the cover art, number one. Number two, also because of the time. I was, even though I didn't start collecting them immediately, I was infatuated with the series pretty much. I was interested in them pretty much from the time they came out. And I did flip through them, and I did see them in the bins, and, a couple I did buy early on when they first came out. I think now it's almost more nostalgia. Because they came, started coming around 87, 88, they were coming out, at the start of the CD technology. That's a long time ago now. So I think part of my reason why in the last couple of years I've gotten very interested in collecting them was pure nostalgia. Compact discs were new, they were very exciting, it was an exciting media, and I couldn't wait to go to the store after work on Fridays and go look for more. And I remember that series coming out, and, it was, at that time, those were pretty much, for these particular jazz artists at that time, those were pretty much the only compilations that were coming out, because like I said, the record companies had this huge back catalog, and they can't get them on CD fast enough. So I think there's, I have memories of flipping through the racks, and even the first Wes Montgomery one that I picked up. And I remember that time, and now it's a long time ago. And I think, my recent really infatuation search for picking these up goes back to those days when I was eyeballing them in the store. Compact disc were new. It was exciting. So I guess it's that part of nostalgia, even though, a lot of people my age might consider CD new technology. Nowadays, it's really not new technology. But I was also saying that in a lot of cases, maybe the Miles Davis is an exception, Verve they're almost shameless in their repackaging. And I only have a small sampling of things that I grabbed off the shelf at the last minute before recording this video of jazz compilations that Verve has done of their artists, not including the Compact Jazz collection. That's probably one of the first ones, if not the first one. They did an interesting series called Jazz Round Midnight. I'll give them a little bit of a break on this one. Jazz Round Midnight was a slight, instead of just throwing another best of out there and throwing some title onto it, I'll give them credit for having a concept, at least with this one, and that was showcasing the quieter side. In Chet Baker's case, you don't really need it because everything's quiet. The quieter side of the artists, and I have this big stack back there, and I think I lost them, of the artists that they did. So here's their Wes Montgomery. It's the more ballady, quieter pieces. And again, I like the cover artwork on these. Not as much as the other one, but most of them, not all of them, but most of them had that clock design on there, and a lot of black and white photos. Now, to this day, I think these are probably also out of print, but this isn't bad if you're collecting some of the stuff by an artist and you do want a collection of a little bit more of the low-key stuff. They did a good job with this, but they're pretty shameless with their... I think that, for an artist like Wes Montgomery, they've probably got more compilations of the material than they do original albums now. Here's one that came out very shortly after. And this isn't... I'm showing you the Wes Montgomery ones because that's the one that I pulled because they were all together. But they did these for pretty much all their jazz artists. There are a lot of them. The Silver Collection. This is one that came out right after Compact Jazz. Just another best of compilation. And in fact... And they did it, like I said, for many, if not most of their jazz artists. Just another single disc compilation of pretty much a lot of the same material even. They didn't even try to avoid duplication. A lot of the same material that was on the Compact Jazz. And this, well, I can't go by the date on here, but I know this is late 80s. This series is out of print. The... Jazz Around Midnight was more of a 90s thing, I want to say. And that's one that, I get the concept for that, why they did that. I'm sure, you folks have probably all seen these. The Jazz Masters series, another Verve compilation, 90s, I guess. Yeah, 94. No shortage of these. This was number 14 in the series. You can imagine how high they went. And again, there's no special... thematic thing. Wes Montgomery's Finest Hour. I'm sure you've seen no shortage of the Finest Hour series. Thanks again, Verve. Just more, and then I'm buying them. And this one really kind of, it's like they're grasping at straws. What the hell, we've done everything. Best of this, gathered that. The Roots of Acid Jazz. And this was a series. There's a couple other artists quite a few other artists that they released this as. Well, Wes Montgomery died in '68, long before acid jazz. And even though they're calling it the roots of acid jazz, that's really stretching it. I love Wes Montgomery. There's nothing acid jazz about Wes Montgomery in any way, shape, or form. You know, whether you're talking about the pop, orchestrated pop stuff he did, or the mainstream jazz stuff he did. But acid jazz, no. They're just coming up with anything and everything to sell compilations. They should put such effort into marketing their full reissued albums, getting them out there with bonus tracks or whatever. My primary reason for doing this, just like the ACM Works compilation, was basically to show you my madness in collecting the Compact Jazz series, which, like I said, it's not even a brilliant compilation series because they're pretty much hampered by a scarcity of the rights to a lot of the material. And yet I'm buying this collection because I love the covers so much and because it's nostalgic to me. So just that crazy thing that if no one understands, I'd be surprised, but if anybody understands, it would certainly be people in the VC. Okay, guys, so that's my thrown together thing. I've been thinking, I had this stack of the Compact Jazz collections here for like 2 months now. But I just got the Modern Jazz Quartet one. I wanted to show that. Okay, guys, so I don't know if any of you can relate or not, but maybe there's some value besides me just talking to myself. Okay, guys, I don't think I'll make any announcements now. Yeah, I see there's quite a few good videos out there lately. Jeff Vinylspin has done a jazz series that's absolutely fantastic. As of today, he just put up number 4, which I've watched 3 times, and I think it's 37 minutes or something. It's brilliant. It's fun. A lot of good stuff. Okay, guys, I'll be back soon with something or other. I'll post up me banging on something or do a video or whatever. I hope everyone out there is doing well, and have a good day. Take care.